Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this UCAS HEPI webinar in Results Week 2024. This is the fifth time that HEPI and UCAS have done an event like this just before the results come out, but it's the first time we've done it from the Cheltenham UCAS HQ, and it's a great pleasure to be here. It's also the first time we've done it with UCAS's relatively new CEO, Jo Saxton, Dr Jo Saxton, CBE, who's been at UCAS for 6 months or so, and previously Jo was Chief Executive of Ofqual. She's been a school leader, she's been an advisor to government on education issues. She has a number of degrees from different higher education institutions, which we might touch upon in a moment. There aren't many housekeeping rules this morning, but we will split the session in two. It will begin with myself, Nick Hillman, I'm Director of HEPI, putting some questions to Jo, and then we will turn to the questions that come in from the audience. So please do feed questions into the Q&A, and please do upvote other people's questions as well, so we know which questions are most popular. We've got a hashtag for today for social media, Results Day 2024. And the only other bit of housekeeping is to remind everybody that this is an on-the-record session. There are journalists registered to attend. We are recording it and we'll make the recording available after the event. So this is an on-the-record event that people can quote from. So, Jo, just before I turn to the admissions round that's going on literally as we speak in this very building, given that you are quite new to this role, can I just ask you very briefly about your own experience of higher education? Because I think you have, I couldn't quite work out how many degrees you have, but you've studied in a number of different countries, and you have a PhD in fine art. So you presumably are a huge fan of what the sector delivered for you personally. Absolutely. My life was transformed by university education, and I think a newspaper quoted me recently saying that I had a greedy collection of degrees. I've got degrees from this country and from the States. And I was so keen to apply for this role because I would like so many more people to benefit from the kinds of opportunities that university gave me. Fantastic. And your PhD was on the actual PhD thesis is on a 17th century Dutch artist who was a religious immigrant in the northern Netherlands. But I did it in the States, so you have to do a second thesis, which was on trade between ancient Egypt and Crete in the 17th century BC. So fantastic. So a huge range there. So, Jo, we're in the midst of this year's admissions round. Results have already occurred in Scotland. The results have already landed in England in the universities, even though people haven't got their own results yet. How's it going? Well, so far, smoothly, which I think is exactly how we'd like it here at UCAS. It was brilliant to go to Scotland to experience Results Day there. And whilst, of course, the sector as a whole is experiencing really challenging times, it was really heartening to see that the most disadvantaged applicants ever had been admitted to Scottish institutions this year. And that's the thing that I really get out of bed for, helping disadvantaged students in particular achieve the opportunities that university can offer. In terms of how things are going here, we transferred all of the qualification results through to universities. I think we started the download about an hour earlier than has happened previously, so we're off to a good start. Thank you. Fantastic. A few years ago, my organisation, and indeed many others, tended to take the view that by the mid-2020s, it would be getting tougher to get into university because of the big growth in the number of 18-year-olds. This year's media coverage seems to suggest that it's maybe a bit more nuanced, a bit more of perhaps a buyer's market this year, that maybe applicants are a little bit better placed than was predicted all those years ago. Is that correct? So I wouldn't want to characterise the year with any sort of adjective yet, but I think what we see in the numbers is healthy interest from domestic 18-year-olds. In fact, the second highest ever number of 18-year-old applicants on record. So in terms of that sort of core undergraduate group, we're seeing really healthy demand. The bit that concerns me, and I'm sure is a concern for policymakers and many others out there, is the decline in applications from mature students, and particularly interest from that cohort in the kinds of courses that the nation really needs more of. So anything healthcare aligned, nursing in particular, teaching. And then, of course, we're also seeing differences in international behaviour.
And on that nursing and mature student, that is quite different, isn't it, to a few years ago when, after COVID, we were told that there was a particular focus on those public service type roles and demand was going up. And you're suggesting it's gone back down again at the very moment when the NHS is looking to recruit more people, the NHS workforce plan, some of the things the new government's been saying. And
that's one of the really exciting things here at UCAS. We're beginning to work with NHS England on whether we can play a role in helping do something about that. But yes, absolutely, there was a huge surge of interest in the pandemic in those kinds of courses. But I think one of the things that my more experienced colleagues here tell me is that if we look back over the past decade, there's a really strong association between low unemployment and mature applicants to those sorts of courses, and low unemployment unemployment continues to be at a historic low, and I think that's partly why those applications aren't where the nation needs them to be at the moment.
They're almost counter-cyclical in relation to
the
economic growth. And I mean, another thing that's been written up a lot this year is that in clearing, which we tended to think of in the past as a mechanism for people who hadn't done quite as well in their A-levels as they hoped to go somewhere else. But one thing that's been written up a lot this year is there's a lot of very selective places in clearing, and there might be people trying to get into a more selective university via clearing. Is that correct, that clearing is this year partly about the most selective institutions?
So I think there are always every kind of institution represented in clearing, and I think the numbers of courses available that we're seeing in clearing as of today is really similar to what's been available last year and in previous years. I think on our latest count there might be one more highly selective institution in clearing than there was at this point last year. But again, my more experienced colleagues tell me that it's not really until Thursday that we can properly make an assessment of the differences of what is or isn't available in clearing. University teams at the moment are making those confirmation decisions, and so the numbers are just, they're fluctuating too much to speculate, I think, at this point. But the thing that I think is really fascinating is what we can see in recent years about how students are using clearing differently. The single largest group of applicants who used UCAS clearing last year were students who had declined their place somewhere else. That's really fascinating. Basically 30% of people using clearing that were students who had used that new functionality. So one of the things that I've gleaned from conversations with vice-chancellors is that they've understood this, and I think that's partly why we might be seeing some differences in what's on offer in clearing, is particularly those who would prefer a PQA approach are seeing this as a chance to kind of nudge the system and let students, do PQA for themselves. So
PQA, post-qualification admissions, which was the flavour of the month a few years ago. In fact, the Labour Party in opposition 5 years ago, when Angela Rayner was the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, said a Labour government would implement PQA in their first term in office. The UCU were in favour of it. All sorts of people were in favour of it. Seems to have gone off the boil in popularity recently. And are you suggesting it's not really necessary because people can do it anyway?
I'm smiling just because I'm on the public record in the Select Committee pre-appointment hearing I did as Chief Regulator. I said that one of the things I hoped to do as Chief Regulator was help implement a PQA system based very much on the disadvantaged students that I worked with in schools, particularly in areas of coastal isolation, who didn't come from backgrounds where it was normal to go to university, and it didn't matter how much teachers and leaders talked to them and their families about the opportunities of university. They just didn't quite believe it was for them, and then they would get results that would have unlocked incredible opportunities, but didn't want to face down, what am I going to do for a year? So I thought that it would be a brilliant idea based very much on that experience. Of course, since then, I had the privilege of serving as Chief Regulator of Qualifications for England, and having seen the qualifications system, I guess, sort of under the bonnet, I saw it firsthand and lost a lot of sleep over quite how big of a deal it is to get all of the assessments that are undertaken properly marked, quality assured, graded and delivered on time. That there's I had a former colleague in the DFE who was absolutely convinced that the exam boards were just sort of sitting there twiddling their thumbs for a few weeks. I can absolutely confirm that is not the case.
My father was the chief examiner for one of the exam boards,
okay.
So I remember the big envelopes of exam scripts in those days coming to the door, and
I just can't see where that time would come from.
Yeah.
Either you've got to teach less, which isn't good, or university starts later. But I think all of the long-term research shows us that the longer a student has a relationship with its prospective institution, the more likely they are to start and to succeed. So again, and I worry about whether particularly disadvantaged students could, whether it's a reasonable expectation on school staff to work with students on a single day in August to help them make those decisions.
So back to this year, any disadvantaged student who falls into that category you referred to, who's got better results than they expected, can be confident that could well be a good place for them in.
I think that'd be really, there's.
Now, this time last year, a little bit, about 11 months or so ago, just before the academic year was starting in schools, there was the whole rack scandal in this concrete scandal. And we've seen some press coverage which suggests it might be unfair that pupils who are affected by rack are not being treated more generously by the exam boards this year. How should universities respond to that whole rack problem?
Well, first of all, I'd say, it's just a terrible situation, and my heart goes out to those students affected. And as Chief Regulator, I met with a few, and, the leaders there and the teachers were just doing absolutely Herculean things to continue to support those students to be able to be ready to sit their qualifications and assessments. So one of the things that I've done here at UCAS is we've shared information with those universities of applicants in affected schools, so that we could be sure that universities are aware.
And it's your hope that admissions teams would engage
colleges,
with that information.
I should say. Yeah, but everybody everywhere wants to help the students. I've spent a lot of time in the last 7 months with admissions teams, vice chancellors. Everybody wants to support students.
Yeah. Well, another thing in terms of supporting students that's been very controversial recently is what's happening to qualifications other than A-levels. So, for example, in an English situation, the outgoing government, and we're not quite sure about the new government, very pro T-levels, rather down on BTECs, which have had quite a good record of getting disadvantaged people, in particular, into universities. And there's this some sort of review going underway about whether that shift of funding away from BTEC should happen. Does UCAS take a view on what's happening in those qualifications?
I'm not sure that UCAS takes a view, but I think UCAS can tell us what the data shows, and the data shows that there's been a strong correlation between widening participation and the use by university admissions teams of BTECs, and significantly 40% of the applicants who took up a university place last year, hang on, I've got that statistic wrong. Of the applicants who took up a university place last year with BTECs, 40% of them were the most disadvantaged, compared to around 20% of those who come in with A-levels. So from my perspective, they're just absolutely critical in terms of widening participation. And if I think back to the sorts of schools that I worked in, so many students would be studying BTECs or other applied generals and/or a sort of mixed diet of A-levels and BTEC. So I'm really, really concerned about their removal. And I think in particular one of the things that's frustrating is I think a lot of the negative rhetoric that there has been about some of the applied general qualifications was based on the unreformed ones. And Ofqual, my predecessors at Ofqual had done a lot of work with the exam boards. They have external assessments. They are really fantastic qualifications for very many students.
Thank you. Now I'm going to put 3 more questions to you, and then I'm going to go to the audience, because I know the questions are coming in from the audience, and I'm very keen to get as much engagement from the audience as possible. My first of my final 3 questions is around student cost of living. Do you think some of the softening in demand among home students in particular for higher education this year is partly to do with how expensive it is to be a student relative to the maintenance support package you receive?
Well, we know from our engagement with students, which happens every day, all year round here at UCAS, that cost of living is the number one thing on their minds. But it seems to be they're worried about sort of cost of living when they're studying. That is higher in their minds than concerns about fees and the loans as such. That's one of the reasons why the first big announcement that I've made was waiving the application fee for any student across the UK who'd received free school meals in the last 6 years. It's a small thing, but I was particularly moved by a student that I met at a university in the Midlands who talked about she was about to graduate and she'd secured her a graduate job as to train as to be an accountant, and she talked about how if her mum had known that she was going to have to pay £26.50, she wouldn't have been able to apply, and she had to hide that. So just removing that, that barrier today felt like a really important thing to do.
And that's actually only one of the quite significant reforms taking place at UCAS at the moment, because you've got the reviews of personal statements going on, you've got the publication of actual entry grades as opposed to published entry grades. And when you roll those 3 measures up together, your point about people on free school meals, the actual entry grades, and the personal statement reform. That's quite a bold reform package. Is there more to come, or is that going to be the settled system for the next few years?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Well, I would definitely like to do further reforms to remove any additional barriers that we find. But I need to take some time and listen to students and work with universities on what those are. We've also got to let these reforms actually roll out and refine them and make sure that they're right. But the overarching point is all about levelling the playing field and removing barriers and giving students and those supporting them the information they need to help make the right choice. Because the most important thing is that students pick the course that is the right course for them. That is the thing that is the single most important determinant of future success.
Yeah, and once they've chosen their course, of course, getting their accommodation in place, because that can be a challenge for people as well. So my final question, I was abroad 10 days ago, and it was extraordinary to look at what was going on in the UK in terms of the riots and the disturbances in cities. And there has been just 1 or 2 concerns that that upset might, for example, put off international students who are intending on coming here in the autumn. And I think the number of international students who apply through UCAS is not massively changed, although postgraduate applications are very significantly down. Do you understand that fear? Do you think it's likely that the riots and the disturbances could mean to fewer international students arriving in the autumn?
Well, obviously, I and everyone at UCAS condemns the violence and the civic unrest, because it's been incredibly distressing. But actually more uplifting has been the surge of the demonstrations that have brought to life that modern British value of toleration, and that's the dominant thing that I've experienced in the schools that I've led and in the universities that I've visited. But it was really clear from my international trip to China to start to understand the international market how sensitive other jurisdictions are to media headlines. So I think the anti-university rhetoric that came from the former government had definitely been noticed abroad, and it's incredibly welcome that the new Secretary of State has said that international students are welcome. And I hope that the coverage of the the peaceful and the toleration protests, that has made headlines abroad and provides reassurance.
And often those were much bigger than the actual protesting people, the pushback. So fantastic. So let's go to the audience, because I know questions are coming in thick and fast. And the first question we have is from Chris Parr, I believe. And it's a question about PQA, which we've already covered a little bit, but UCAS, of course, written a lot about PQA over the years. And the question is simply, is UCAS still considering PQA, or is that just not really a priority anymore?
So that's definitely a matter for government. And UCAS will work with whoever is in power to provide our perspective on any policy changes that a government wishes to make.
Yeah, thank you. The next question, we're going to do some rapid fire, I think, is from Gillian Duncan, is can you say more, and I didn't ask you that much about this, about the international picture. Obviously, a lot of international students don't apply through UCAS because they go via agents and they're postgraduates or whatever, but some do. And what are the international numbers looking like for applications for this autumn?
So I think you've said the key thing, which is here at UCAS, we see the undergraduate picture, and within that we don't see the full international admissions picture. 1 in 5 applicants to university through UCAS is an international student, but I think it's only about 2/3 of all international undergraduate applicants. There's been a significant decline in applications from Nigeria this year, related very much to economic conditions and the situation there. But I think Nigeria aside, the UCAS picture from international interest is pretty stable and similar to what we've seen in previous years. I think there was a surge of interest from Turkey, which is a new growth market that's really interesting, and one of my colleagues is about to go off there to try and understand more about why that is.
Any EU numbers within that? Is there a story there or not really?
I mean, EU applications really suffered post-Brexit, but the quantum of applications, Nigeria aside, is broadly similar to recent years.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a question from Paul Woodgate, who wrote a brilliant report for HEPI quite recently, so dig that out, on what is the impact of concerns around financial sustainability, which again is something I didn't put to you before, but there are all sorts of universities being mentioned in the media that have severe financial problems. Should people be encouraging their children to apply for universities which we know might have financial challenges?
So, I mean, the message that UCAS would give to students and families is that you can and should go ahead and apply with confidence, because this is an incredibly well-regulated sector here in the UK. The Office for Students exists to provide those, in effect, consumer protections to students. The Office for Students' own data, shows a picture of universities, continuing to provide world-class education. And in fact, by almost every OECD measure, despite there's no doubt that the amount of money universities are working with is not what it was, and many of them are having to make very difficult choices. But nevertheless, despite those difficult choices, we still have one of the best academic to student ratios in the OECD, amongst the best outcome rates. So by all of those measures, we are still offering a world-class education.
So you remain an optimist about the quality
so
of the
I remain an optimist.
Higher education system. Fantastic. So we have a question from Ryan Frost, who says, does UCAS's approach to RAC, this concrete issue, particularly in schools, although it's affected some
colleges
universities
too,
as well, indicate it is supportive of contextual admissions? So you suggested, I think, in my question to you, that universities should take into account if a student's education has been limited, an applicant's education has been limited by RAC. That suggests you think universities should be thinking about the context in which an applicant is applying and their background.
So obviously, I've been at UCAS around half a year. I was involved in admissions for one cycle in a highly selective institution. what feels like a million years ago at the very beginning of my academic career. So I'm in no way an expert on this, but I think what I would urge is to reflect on the difference between a contextual offer and contextual admissions. The admissions teams who I've met in some 25 institutions over the last 7 months, are used to taking a range of factors and evidence into consideration when they're doing offer making and making confirmation decisions. And is it appropriate to understand the context of applicants? Absolutely. That's why we have disadvantage measures. And this is a particular extreme piece of context that has affected students in around 200 schools or colleges, and it's appropriate that admissions teams should be aware of that.
Now, there hasn't been much pushback on your reforms to the personal statement, as far as I can work out, and that you're replacing it with 3 questions. But in as much as there've been any pushback, 1 or 2 people have said there could be people who are limited in what they can convey to their desired university by having 3 sort of structured questions. And I'm just wondering if that links to the contextual points. Some people say, it might limit what you're able to say. Is that
so
fair?
Of course, the reformed personal statement hasn't gone live yet. No candidates actually used it. So we've got to let candidates use it first.
It goes live this autumn for next year's entry. Is that correct?
Exactly. But again, I would encourage any student who likes the structure to just write 1, 2, and 3 and kind of use the questions as prompts. So because it's based on really good research and lots of work with advisors and students, and it's meant to help level the playing field by just giving a consistent format to everyone and tell the admissions teams the things that they've told us they really wanted to know about, rather than worrying about sort of creating perfect original prose. But I think the thing that's the most important thing, there's 2 really important things about the personal statement. First of all, it should be exactly that, particularly in age of AI, it should be personal. It should be about you and why you want to do that course. That's the most important thing that admissions teams want to know. And even for those who say, well, admissions teams, they spend a minute looking at each one or whatever the data point is, we did lots of research. We did qualitative and quantitative research before we launched the questions. And the incredibly strong finding back from students was that even in the event that an admissions team didn't use it, so we asked an extreme question just to see what they thought, they still found it a worthwhile activity to undertake because it's formative for the applicant. It helps them really be sure, I want to do this course. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the formative value of the personal statement.
And there's this odd historical quirk, isn't there? The number of characters in the current personal statement is purely to do with UCAS's computer capability decades ago, whereas your new system is based on.
I think it was actually about the capacity of a printer and what could be what could be printed. In fact, the first ever UCAS application is in a frame in the lobby here, so you must have a look at that on the way out. But so that's definitely one of the things that we'd like to look at, because in a digital age we don't need to have that sort of limitation. So the first thing is to check that the structured approach, which is like the best teaching, it's a bit of scaffolding. We need to check that works, and then we can think about is the length of it right.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Samina Khan, who, if it's the Samina Khan I'm thinking of, is in charge of admissions at Oxford, I believe. So I hope I've got the person right there. What was behind the free school meal change, and what further support will UCAS offer in that area?
That's a very good question. Well, I as somebody with a long-standing interest in education and widening participation, I'd been delighted to see the progress that had been made in terms of the number of disadvantaged going to university over the last decade. But I had also noticed that had begun to slow, and there are more 18-year-olds alive, and I would like more rather than fewer of them to make the most of university opportunity. And so when you put all those things together, combined with the student visits and our research about the concerns around the cost of living, it seemed like a really a really helpful thing that UCAS could do. Would I like to do more things? Definitely. Do I know what they are yet? I don't know.
Yeah. You published some extraordinary data the other day by parliamentary constituency, I think, about the levels of people applying, and Wimbledon was something like 80%, and Barrow-in-Furness was less than 15%. And are these the sort of mechanisms you think UCAS can deliver to equalise that at least to some degree?
Yeah, well, that's it was such a brilliant piece of work that I was talking to the team about, what could we do to brief new MPs post-election, and they had the idea of sharing constituency level data, and looking at it was just incredibly shocking, that stark difference. Not only the sort of London and the rest of the country divide and north-south issues, but that particular stat of Wimbledon versus Barrow-in-Furness. Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing in the autumn is bringing back a schools team that UCAS used to have, and we hope to be able to provide. It's so good to do things in person. That's partly why you've come here today. We want some of our experts to be able to go to places like Barrow-in-Furness and see what else, if anything, we could do.
Just on the equality point, some years in Results Week there's a big story about male-female disparities. Are we likely to see any closing of the gap between boys who tend to do less well and girls this year, young men, young women?
Golly, I think you're going to need to talk to the current chief regulator about those sorts of.
Is there something that worries you though, the underachievement of young men, arguably, in this country?
Any kind of underachievement is distressing and a concern for all of us involved in education. But it's too early to speculate about what we might see this week. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So another question, Connie Dimsdale: are there any subject trends, level 2, level 3, or HE, that concern you? And if so, what can we do about it? I mean, I have foreign languages ringing in my ears whenever I think of this issue.
Yeah, and I think back to I opened a new school in the Kent coast and worked with local employers on support for it. And I talked to them about why are there not more local students in your most highly paid or your senior management roles? And the 4 major local employers who I spoke to, who were EDF, Eurotunnel, Port of Dover, all talked about the importance of a foreign language in their organisations for achieving the best paid and more senior roles. And so that little school, modern languages were a required GCSE for everyone. So I've sort of experienced how important those languages are. I think in terms of what UCAS data is showing is huge surge of interest for sort of all things STEM in terms of university applications. And that's really fascinating. I suppose one of the things that I think about, one of the things that is a brilliant thing about these sorts of jobs is you get to talk to students a lot. And I think about the most recent group of students that I spoke to just a couple of weeks ago. They talked about how difficult it is. You've got teachers in school and college saying, pursue the thing that you absolutely love, and then influence from families and carers to do the subjects that are sort of perceived to be the ones that you might get most highly paid from. And so I would
pause there, because the next question links to this actually, from Steve Minney of Swansea. Whose responsibility is IAG, Information Advice and Guidance, in 2024? And does UCAS have any plans in this space?
So UCAS does a huge amount in the IAG space, and we can always do more and better. So any thoughts on what else we can do? I mean, one of the things that was very clear to me from the short time I had as a senior civil servant is, all of the forecasts suggest that schools and colleges, they've got increasing so many other things to do. It's increasingly hard for professionals in schools and colleges to find the time for IAG. So again, UCAS absolutely wants to provide that support.
But my understanding of the evidence is, of course, it's incredibly cost effective when it's done well, because it stops people making decisions that don't work out for them, puts them on the right track earlier. So yeah, it'd be fascinating to see what the new government does in this area. So one more question from the audience. How much, we've touched on this a little bit, but how much choice will there be in clearing? People will be sitting thinking, what results are they going to get, and weighing up what they might do on Thursday. And will there be more choice in clearing this year than normal?
So I think as of today, there are just under 30,000 courses available, and that's really similar to what we saw at this point last year. That's absolutely loads of choice. And again, as of certainly when I last properly looked at them, the end of last week, you know, there were every kind of course under the sun available, from medicine through to psychology. So you know, there is a lot of choice.
Great. And one thing that we're seeing this year in terms of clearing and choice is, I mean, it was new to me when I saw it in the paper the other day, clearing VIPs and all sorts of particularly generous offers being made to people who haven't yet locked down a place and want to. Is that sort of fight and battle for applicants something UCAS welcomes, or is there a slight risk that we might disrupt a young person's decision-making process? If we're saying to someone who's barely an adult, come here because we'll give you free rent or free that, and are you worried it might just slightly mean people make decisions that aren't necessarily right?
I mean, obviously those sorts of admission strategies are up to individual institutions. That's not UCAS's territory.
It's enshrined in law, isn't it?
But I would challenge you to assume that it's only young people that are trying to be attracted. You know, I think any approaches which help mature students, you know, actually think about, you know, being the nurses and the teachers that the nation needs, I think they're worth a try.
And of course, the outgoing government's way of tackling the decline in mature students, which isn't only this year, it's been a long-term trend, was the lifelong learning entitlement, where you could do various modules, stack them up maybe into a degree, maybe take them in more than one university. Do you see, if that gets off the ground in the way the outgoing government wanted it to, and the new government's had some warm words about it when it was going through Parliament, when they were in opposition, do you see UCAS having a role in the LLE and rejuvenating mature level study, or is UCAS more about full-time?
So absolutely, it's a brilliant idea, and you know, the UCAS board are really committed to UCAS playing its part in the delivery and implementation of the LLE. So we stand ready to play our part when the new government has decided how it wants to approach that.
Yeah, so you think there is a role. And will UCAS continue to have a role in apprenticeships as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, again, almost 1 million unique users come to UCAS every year for information, advice and guidance about what they might do next. And around half of them have told us they wanted information, advice and guidance about apprenticeships. So for me, that's the most important thing, that there is student choice and that they have the right advice to help them decide which choice they want to make. But I mean, colleagues who've heard me talk at events publicly will have heard me say, you know, on my watch, we will keep the main thing the main thing. Yeah. You know, UCAS was formed by universities as a charity to be the national shared admission service. I take that incredibly seriously, but I also want to provide students with the choice that they want. So, you know, absolutely we'll continue to do.
So 2 more quick points for me before we wind up. The first is, and you've talked about this a little bit, but your previous job almost could not be more relevant to your current job, in the sense that, you know, the relationship between what Ofqual does and what universities do is so close. How do you think that changes your approach to the role?
Well, I think I'm in the really privileged position that I've seen the admissions journey from pretty much all sides now. You know, I've been an applicant, I've been a school leader working with sixth formers on what to do next. I've sat in government, and then I've worked incredibly closely with the qualification system. And I suppose it was the summer when I was chief regulator where applied general qualification results weren't delivered in time to enable ease of progression, that's the thing that really kind of captured my attention, and I'm so delighted now that we've got, you know, a level 3 results day. We're not just, you know, people don't just talk about A-level results day anymore. But I think it was that experience in that summer that really made me interested in the admissions
And
system.
do you have confidence in the system? Because one question that sometimes comes up is, you know, it's a bit of a black and white judgment on a young person's potential, isn't it, A-levels, and you've got all the arguments that go back and forth about whether exams are an accurate way of assessing someone's ability and whether the marking is correct and whether there's fuzziness. And you broadly have confidence in the system, but as you've already implied, universities should take all sorts of contextual factors into
So I have huge confidence in the system. I wouldn't have spent, you know, evenings, nights, weekends away from my own children to reinstate externally assessed qualifications and tackle grade inflation if I didn't believe that was the case. And having spent the best part of 3 years doing that, you know, the rigour within the system is exemplary, and you know, the reliability of qualifications in our jurisdiction is amongst the best in the world. A bit like democracy, is it perfect? No, it's not. But it is absolutely the fairest form of assessment that we have. And I think the pandemic and the arrangements that were, you know, for all sorts of very good reasons put in place really showed that. But the thing that was so extraordinary about my time as chief regulator, in that first year I visited almost 100 schools and colleges, and there was only one where students didn't want to have external exams back. So the strength of feeling from students, they wanted externally assessed qualifications back.
Thank you. I'm going to thank you, Jo, for being so open on that issue and on every other issue that I've put to you this morning. We're going to call the session to a halt because we said we would stop at 10:45. Thank you to you, Jo, for being so open, and good luck to you on Thursday and all your colleagues, and good luck to everybody getting their results on Thursday. Thank you to your colleagues here at UCAS, particularly Ben and David and the team who no one on screen can see, but there's a big team behind here who've made sure this morning's gone smoothly. Thank you too to my colleagues, Emma in particular, who's organised today, who's actually on holiday, but I think listening in from her holiday, to Carol, to Lucy, to Josh, who's been tweeting away. Do look out for the recording of today's session, and do take a look at the HEPI website for all sorts of other information about admissions, not to mention the UCAS website, which will be receiving millions of hits and lots of phone calls, etc. to this building later in the week. So we're going to call a halt to it here. Thank you very much for listening in, for your questions, and good luck on Thursday.
Nick, thank you, and thank you to HEPI for coming here.
Thank you.